You know that feeling. You want to change your life. You set New Year's resolutions. You promise yourself this is the year everything transforms. But by February, you're back where you started. Same habits, same results, same disappointment. The problem isn't willpower, it's not motivation, and it's definitely not that you lack the intelligence to figure out what to do. The real problem is this: you're trying to change your behavior when you should be changing your identity. This is the core insight from James Clear's Atomic Habits, one of the most powerful books about behavior change ever written. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the exact framework that Clear spent 6 years researching to put together. This isn't just another productivity book. This is a system that has changed millions of lives, from Olympic athletes to Fortune 500 CEOs to everyday people like you and me. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what small habits can do, but why they work, and exactly how to implement them into your life starting today. Part 1. The Power of Tiny Changes. Let me tell you a story. In 2011, there was a professional cycling team in Great Britain called Team Sky. They were underdogs. For 100 years, no British cyclist had ever won the Tour de France. Everyone thought it was impossible. The sport was dominated by European power players, and Britain was considered too cold, too small, too underfunded. Then Dave Brailsford, the new performance director, arrived with a radical idea. He called it the aggregation of marginal gains. Instead of trying to make massive changes overnight, he decided to improve everything by just 1%. 1% better bike seats, 1% better sleeping arrangements, 1% better hand hygiene to avoid getting sick, 1% better this, 1% better that. Nobody thought this approach would work. Everyone was skeptical. But here's what happened. Within 5 years, Team Sky won the Tour de France. In the next decade, they won 8 more times. They completely dominated the sport by making tiny, incremental improvements across every single area. This is the core principle of James Clear's entire book. He calls it Atomic Habits. Atomic because we're talking about the smallest possible unit of behavior change, and habits because that's how change actually happens in real life. Here's the thing that most people get wrong about habits. They think you need massive transformation. You look at someone who's incredibly fit and you think they must be on some extreme diet. You see someone who's built a successful business and you think they had some magical breakthrough moment. But that's not how it works. Clear spent 6 years researching this, and he found that the people who achieve extraordinary results aren't the ones who make huge changes. They're the ones who make small changes consistently over long periods of time. Think about it this way. If you improve by just 1% per day, mathematically, you're going to be 37 times better in 1 year. That's the power of compound growth. But here's the challenge. 1% improvement is so small that it feels insignificant. It's invisible day to day. You can't see the difference between today and tomorrow, but over time, that 1% adds up to something absolutely remarkable. Part 2. The Habit Loop. How behaviors actually work. So if tiny changes are so powerful, the question becomes, how do we actually create them? Clear spent years studying neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics to answer this question. What he found is that every single habit follows a pattern. He calls it the habit loop, and it consists of 4 parts: cue, craving, response, and reward. Let me walk you through this with a real example. Let's say you want to start going to the gym every morning. Right now, you don't have this habit. So what's the cue that could trigger this behavior? It could be setting your alarm for 5 a.m. It could be laying out your gym clothes the night before. The cue is anything that prompts the behavior to start. Then comes the craving. This is the second element of the loop. The cue triggers a craving for something. When you see your gym clothes laid out, you crave the feeling of being fit. When your alarm goes off, you crave the energy you'll feel after a workout. The craving is the motivational force behind the behavior. Next is the response. This is the actual behavior itself. You get out of bed, you put on your gym clothes, you drive to the gym, you do the workout. The response is the action that Clear is talking about. And critically, the response must be easy enough to do. If your gym is an hour away, the response becomes harder and you're less likely to do it. Finally, there's the reward. This is the satisfaction or pleasure that comes from the behavior. It could be the endorphins from working out. It could be the sense of accomplishment. It could be the recognition from others. The reward is what makes you want to repeat this behavior again tomorrow. Here's what's crucial about this loop. If any one of these four elements is missing, the habit doesn't form. You might have a strong cue, but if there's no reward, you won't repeat the behavior. You might have a clear craving, but if the response is too difficult, you won't follow through. Clear teaches that most people focus on the wrong parts of this loop. They focus on motivation and willpower to create the response. But that's exhausting. That's why most people fail. Instead, Clear recommends focusing on making the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying. This is where the real magic happens. Part 3. Identity-based habits, the real secret. Now here's where Clear's thinking gets truly revolutionary. He talks about 3 levels of behavior change. Most people focus on the first level, outcome-based habits. These are habits focused on what you want to achieve. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to run a marathon. I want to make $1 million. These outcomes are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But here's the problem. If your motivation is purely outcomes-based, you become fragile. You're doing the behavior only because of an external reward. And as soon as the reward becomes harder to access, or as soon as you experience setback, you lose motivation. The second level is process-based habits. These are focused on the systems and routines themselves. I will go to the gym 5 days a week. I will write for 1 hour every morning. I will review my finances every Sunday. The process-based approach is better than outcomes-based because it's more within your control, but it still has a problem. It's still based on external metrics. Clear argues that the real lasting change happens at the third level, identity-based habits. This is where you stop thinking about outcomes or even processes. Instead, you change who you are. Here's the example he uses. Most people who quit smoking do it for external reasons. They want to be healthier. They want to save money. They want to live longer for their kids. These are all great reasons. But statistically, most people who quit smoking this way relapse. The problem is their identity hasn't changed. Deep down, they still think of themselves as a smoker. But some people quit smoking and never relapse. What's different about them? They've changed their identity. They no longer think of themselves as a smoker. When offered a cigarette, they don't say, "I'm trying to quit." They say, "I'm not a smoker." It's a completely different psychological position. Clear spent years studying this pattern, and he found it everywhere. The people who are most consistent with their habits aren't doing them for external rewards. They're doing them because of who they believe they are. An athlete trains not because they want a trophy. They train because they identify as an athlete. Someone who builds a successful business does it not for the money. They do it because they identify as an entrepreneur. So the question becomes, how do you change your identity? Clear's answer is brilliant in its simplicity. Through your behaviors. You don't change your identity and then change your behavior. You change your behavior and your identity follows. Every time you choose to go to the gym, even when you don't feel like it, you're voting for the identity of someone who is fit. Every time you read a book instead of watching TV, you're voting for the identity of someone who is intelligent. Every time you show up for your work, even when it's hard, you're voting for the identity of someone who is dedicated. These votes add up. Your identity isn't fixed. It's constantly being reinforced or weakened by your daily choices. And the beautiful thing is, you get to choose who you want to become through the habits you build. Part 4. The Implementation System. Now, understanding the habit loop and identity-based change is powerful. But Clear knew that most people needed a practical system they could actually use. So he developed what he calls the 1% Better system, which consists of several specific strategies. The first strategy is making the habit obvious. Clear teaches that you should never rely on willpower to remember to do your habit. Instead, you should make it impossible to miss. One technique he recommends is called habit stacking. The idea is simple. After I do, I will do. For example, after I pour my morning coffee, I will do 10 push-ups. After I brush my teeth, I will drink a glass of water. After I close my laptop, I will stretch for 5 minutes. The power of habit stacking is that you're piggybacking on a behavior that already has a strong cue. You don't need to remember anything. The existing habit is the reminder. The second strategy is making the habit attractive. This is about associating the new behavior with something you love. If you want to build a running habit, maybe you only allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcast while running. Now the behavior becomes attractive because it comes with something enjoyable. Clear calls this temptation bundling, and it works remarkably well. The third strategy is making the habit easy. This is where most people get it wrong. They focus on motivation, but Clear found that environment matters far more. If you want to eat healthier, don't rely on willpower to avoid junk food. Instead, don't bring junk food into your house. If you want to read more, put books on your nightstand, not in a closet where they're hard to access. Clear calls this environmental design, and it's incredibly powerful. When the behavior is easy, you'll do it. When it requires effort, you won't. There's a specific principle Clear emphasizes here called the 2-minute rule. The idea is that every habit should take less than 2 minutes to start. You don't go to the gym and do a 2-hour workout. You go to the gym and do 2 minutes of movement. You don't write a book in one sitting. You write for 2 minutes. This removes the friction of starting. Once you start, you usually continue. But most people get stuck on the starting part. The fourth strategy is making the habit satisfying. This is about the immediate reward. Clear found that people repeat behaviors when they feel immediate satisfaction. So if you're trying to build a habit, you need to find some way to make it immediately rewarding. This is why tracking habits works so well. When you mark off a box on a calendar showing you did the behavior, that immediate visual feedback is rewarding. It doesn't cost anything, but it's powerful. Clear also talks about the importance of never missing twice. If you miss your habit once, that's just a lapse. If you miss it twice, that's the beginning of a new pattern. So the key is to make missing impossible, or if it does happen, to get back on track immediately the next day. Part 5. Practical application and real examples. Now, let me give you some real examples of how these principles work in practice, because this is where theory becomes reality. Consider the story of an Olympic rower named Jamie Kerr. She wasn't naturally talented. She grew up in a small town. By conventional standards, she had no business becoming an Olympic champion. But she understood identity-based habits. She didn't train because she wanted a medal. She trained because that's what rowers do. That's who she was becoming. Every single day, she showed up to the training grounds. She made her habit obvious by training at the same time every morning. She made it easy by training with a team that would hold her accountable. She made it satisfying by tracking her improvements. After years of this, she won an Olympic gold medal. But more importantly, she had become an Olympic rower. Or consider business leaders like Richard Branson or Elon Musk. These people aren't more talented than everyone else. What they do is build habits that compound over time. Branson reads constantly. Musk works obsessively on his businesses. Over decades, these small habits compound into extraordinary results. Or take the story of how professional athletes approach habit building. A professional basketball player doesn't shoot three-pointers because he's motivated by the idea of winning championships. He shoots three-pointers because that's what basketball players do. It's part of his identity. He's shot thousands upon thousands of them. The habit is so ingrained that it becomes automatic. Clear spends time in his book talking about the concept of habit automaticity. Once a habit becomes truly automatic, you don't have to think about it anymore. Your brain essentially operates on autopilot. This is where the real-time savings come from. You're not spending mental energy deciding whether to do the behavior. You're just doing it. One more example. Clear talks about a man named Everett Peppers who wanted to quit smoking. Peppers implemented a version of Clear's system. He made the habit of not smoking obvious by telling everyone around him he had quit. He made it easy by avoiding situations where he typically smoked. He made it satisfying by calculating how much money he was saving and looking at that number every single day. Within a year, he had not only quit smoking, but he'd also rebuilt his identity as a non-smoker. 5 years later, when someone offered him a cigarette, he didn't say, "I'm trying to quit." He said, "I'm not a smoker." The identity had fully transformed. Part 6. Common mistakes and how to avoid them. Before we wrap up, Clear addresses some common mistakes people make when trying to implement these systems. The first mistake is trying to change too many habits at once. You read Atomic Habits, and you get excited, and you try to implement 10 new behaviors immediately. This overwhelms your system. Clear recommends focusing on just one habit at a time. Let it become automatic before you move to the next one. The second mistake is not tracking your habits. Clear is a big advocate for habit tracking. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as marking an X on a calendar every day you do the behavior. That visual feedback is surprisingly powerful. It creates satisfaction, which is one of the 4 elements of the habit loop. The third mistake is being perfectionist about habits. If you miss a day, you don't give up entirely. Clear found that many people follow what he calls the perfection trap. They miss one day, and they think the whole system has failed, so they abandon it. In reality, Missing one day is not a problem. It's missing 2 days in a row that breaks the chain. So if you miss, your job is simply to do it again tomorrow. Conclusion. So here's what we've learned from Atomic Habits. Real, lasting change doesn't come from massive transformations. It comes from tiny, incremental improvements that compound over time. It comes from understanding the habit loop and using it to your advantage. Most importantly, it comes from changing your identity, because once your identity shifts, your behaviors shift naturally. The system that Clear provides is practical and actionable. Make your habits obvious. Make them attractive. Make them easy. Make them satisfying. Stack them onto existing behaviors and track them consistently. If you can do this, even at 1% better per day, mathematically, you will be 37 times better in a year. That's not an exaggeration. That's the power of compound growth. The question isn't whether this works. Clear's research proves it does. The question is, who do you want to become? Because that answer determines what habits you need to build today, not tomorrow, not next year, today. If you found this helpful, please consider subscribing to the chapter for more book summaries that will change how you think. I'm releasing new videos every week, and if you want to dive deeper into Atomic Habits, I'll leave a link to the book below. Thanks for watching.